So I'm very excited to be here while we get a report of a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. We had Kate and Billy Dempsey to come and speak about their ministry that is based out of Greenville, South Carolina now, but he's going to go into the details of where all that takes them. So for those of you that don't know, Kate is Mary's daughter, oldest of 4 daughters. I think you guys have met several of them, and I have known both Kate and Billy pretty much ever since they've been Kate and Billy. I'm trying to think back first experiences with Kate. Kate actually, when Mary and I were at another church, she was children's pastor there. We became friends. Kate was finishing up high school, so that's how far back that goes. And she was an intern with a ministry that I was running one summer, so I've had a little bit of experience with that. But mostly, I've had to get a pretty good seat in watching the development of God's calling on their life and where He's taken them in ministry and the parts of the world that they have been ended up in has been pretty exciting. And the addition of 3 boys that aren't this size anymore, but are this size, and this size now. And so all that's been really exciting. Kate and I actually were both pregnant with Rush and Molly at the same time. So we've had all kinds of connections through the years, and just grateful that we can continue to be a part. Now, our tithe money, our 10% tithe money that we do, this is the kind of stuff that we get to do. And it's so exciting because we get to be a part of work that people are doing that we may not necessarily be able to go, but we get to be a part of it. So I'm going to invite Billy up, and if Kate's going to speak, she can come on up too. And we like it when she speaks too. And ask you just to let us know what's going on now and how we can continue to be a part of the work that you guys are doing. Okay, thank you.
Check.
It takes it just a second. You should be good.
1, 2,
You guys hear Billy?
Hello.
Yes.
Morning. Well, it's interesting that it's almost been a year because a lot has changed in a year. Are you going to run slides, Kate, or is Mike going to do it? Are you going to do slides? You got it? Okay, great. A lot has changed in a year. A lot of things that we couldn't predict, and actually a lot of what I talked about this morning fits into that. And I think what I've found is oftentimes most of our change in life has been God kind of surprising us. We kind of always have a plan, but He tends to have another plan, and we just kind of show up and say, okay, God, we're going to trust you. But thank you guys for welcoming us. We've always felt welcomed here, and that's actually what I'm going to talk about today is what it looks like to welcome a stranger. Now, what Marty didn't say is that she and I share some deeper roots, some South Alabama roots. So we both kind of grew up in the same area in Alabama, and so she grew up there. But you've been raised by the South Alabama life, and so we talked a lot about that part of my life. My mom and sister still live in South Alabama, so we're always going back to visit there. But we, as a family, in 2005, we moved to Bangkok, Thailand. Now, when we did that, we went as missionaries, and we did it voluntarily. We sold our house, we boxed up all of our stuff, and we packed way too many suitcases. We gathered a team of volunteers who would give and help us to go as workers, as ministry workers overseas. But all that was voluntarily. We chose to do that. But at the same time, when we showed up in Thailand, we were strangers. We didn't know the language. We didn't know the culture. We didn't know how to dress. We didn't know what you bought, where you bought it. You can go to the next slide if you want. This just kind of shows a picture. This is 2015. Those are all of our bags. How many bags, Kate? Yeah, too much. But what's interesting is when we got to Thailand, we discovered that the Thai people were some of the most hospitable people in the world. They welcomed us. They smiled even though they couldn't understand us. They helped us figure out life there. I just remember we were put on a shuttle van to to move to our new town. And we had no one with us. We just had our bags, our kids, and the driver who didn't speak English. And I think we had little cards that kind of said, say this if you need to go to the bathroom. Say this if someone is thirsty. Say this if someone's sick. And that's all we had. And we had no one else to help us in that transition but Thai people. And but what was beautiful about that is the Thai people were gracious and patient and hospitable. They showed compassion to us. And in a lot of ways, I think the way that Thai people treated us is how I imagine Christ would treat a foreigner. Is very welcoming, very gracious, and just kind of open to whoever God brings into their life. But there came a lot of fun stories with that. So one story early on is the town we lived in, it was very hard to find cheese. And I didn't know the language very well, but I was trying to learn. But I decided I was going to go to the market and I was going to find cheese. And I go into the market and I'm using the word for cheese and I'm asking all these different market ladies and they're just kind of staring at me. And finally I found one and they were so excited. They were like, yes, come with me. We go back through this little market. She opens her fridge and she has this giant block. And it's like this wide and like this thick. And I'm just thinking, you know what? She might not have it ever again. But we're going to buy this. I don't know how much it costs. I don't even know what the currency is, but I'm going to buy it. I take it home. I bring it to Kate, and I'm like, I've got the cheese. She opens it up, and she's like, it's butter. and that's just kind of how life was there, you know? And we kept trying to figure it out, but it was difficult to be a foreigner. It was difficult to be a stranger. And so today what I want to talk about is what it's like for people who come to the U.S. And what it's like for them to have to go through those adjustments and what opportunity we have as a church, not just this church, but the church in the U.S. to really welcome the foreigner, welcome the stranger. First, I'm going to read from Matthew 25, 31 through 40. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, and need clothing and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and go visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. It's a great picture of the reminder of how we're supposed to care for those in our community. Care for the stranger, the sick, those who are in prison. And so it's just a reminder for us to think about who are we as the body of Christ and what has Christ called us to. And the truth is, we've all found ourselves to be strangers. If you think back to your life, you probably had a time where maybe you moved during the school year to a new school. And you walk in and you don't know where anything is. You don't know when lunch is or how you go through the lunch line or any of that. Maybe you've gone to a party or a wedding or a cookout and you show up and you don't know anybody at first. And you maybe have a friend who invited you, but you can't find them. And just that feeling of walking into a place where I don't know anybody. Or maybe you've come here for the first time and you don't know anybody here. And you have to get the courage to walk in and open that door knowing you don't know anybody. But it's uncomfortable and it can be lonely to be a stranger. And sometimes maybe some of you have traveled around in different towns or maybe to another country and you've experienced what it's like to not have the local language and just kind of feel helpless. Another story from our life, Kate and I in 2007, we traveled to the United Arab Emirates, which is in the Middle East. And that was supposed to be a vision trip, and this is kind of
pre-internet, pre-phones with pictures on them. The person who was hosting us, we had never met. We had had a conversation on the phone. We had a picture. It was kind of grainy and whatever. But in terms of landing, we showed up having no idea who was picking us up. And I just remember getting off the plane and kind of realizing, wait a minute, we talked about these details, but we didn't he wasn't very specific. He was kind of a loose playing guy. And so we walk through the terminal, we get our bags, and we see all these foreign people. And we're just kind of like, they're wearing full Middle Eastern Muslim garb. And I'm just like, who is the person that's supposed to pick us up? And in that moment, I just thought, we've made a mistake. Like, we didn't plan this out very well. And we just keep walking. And finally, this guy just pops up out of a coffee shop, and he's like, Billy! And he doesn't know it. He's just like, and I'm like, how'd you know? He's like, you're the only white guy that showed up. And I'm like, well, that's how I know you're the right guy, because you're the only white guy picking us up. But the in-between moment is very uncomfortable, because you just don't know anybody, and you're in a place where you're kind of vulnerable. And that feeling is just not great, but that's just kind of something that we've had to go through. So anyways, Marty mentioned we gave an update last summer. And what's interesting is, if you were to ask me last summer what our ministry would look like this summer, I wouldn't even be able to possibly paint this picture of our work with refugees. But something happened in August of last year that really changed our work. And I'm just going to share a little bit about that. So a year ago, the United States and a lot of their allies decided to remove their military presence in Afghanistan. And you guys might be familiar. I think we have some pictures of, you can go to the next one, I think. Yeah, so go to the plane. I think there's one with the plane. So you guys might have seen these on the news around August 17th of last year. Basically what happened is the U.S. military, the Allied forces, were removing their presence in Afghanistan. The reason why is the Taliban was moving in and kind of taking over again. The problem with that is, for almost 20 years, a lot of Afghans have been working with the U.S. military as they've been in the country of Afghanistan. And these Afghans have been translators. They've helped at the government hospital or the Red Cross hospital, things like this. And the reality is the Taliban had been keeping a list of people that were assisting the U.S. government and the Allied forces to basically help kind of have a government and a system in place that was peaceful in the country. And so as the U.S. pulled out, many of the people that were Afghans knew that their lives would be threatened by the Taliban. The Taliban had a list, and their plan was, once the military leaves, once the U.S. leaves, once the Allied forces leave, we're going to go house to house on this list of Afghan citizens that helped the government, that helped the U.S., and we're going to kill them. And that's what they did. And so August of last year, what you had was all these Afghans that were desperate to leave the country because they knew it was either leave or be killed. And so that's why the next picture, you probably saw or maybe heard stories of them chasing the planes, trying to get on because they were desperate to get out of there. They had no other option. They knew that the Taliban would be coming. With that in mind, many people in Afghanistan did what they could. They escaped, or they were helped out. The U.S. military did help a lot of Afghans leave the country. There was about 70,000 Afghans that came to the U.S., and many of these were translators or families of translators, or they worked in U.S. government offices in Afghanistan. And what that looked like is I've talked to U.S. military veterans, and what they said is our translators were tied to our hip in every battle we were in. They were one of us. They fought beside us. And really what we saw in the U.S. is the U.S. veterans, the military veterans, were the ones who advocated for all of these people to come to the U.S. because they had such a close relationship with these men and women who had been there, every battle they were in while they were in that country. So you had 70,000 come to the U.S., and 350 came to Charlotte, or the region of Charlotte. Not necessarily in the city of Charlotte, but Union County, Mecklenburg County, there's about 350 Afghans. And so how did we get involved in this ministry? We have no experience working with refugees. We have no experience working with Afghans. The only thing that had popped on our radar was last summer, Kate decided, I'm interested in Afghanistan, and she bought a map, and she started praying and reading books about Afghanistan. But this is before they began to evacuate. What happened for us is a friend of mine who had worked with East Mountain was a U.S. veteran, went to West Point, and he had a group of veterans that called him and said, hey, we know you have a nonprofit. Can you help refugees? And the situation was, I'll share that in a minute, but they basically said, can you help? And we kind of were just in a position to say, sure, why not? We had some other ministry stuff, but we were kind of looking for some new opportunities, and here was an opportunity to help. And we didn't know what it was going to look like, but we said yes. And so one of the things that we've been doing is that for the last several months, we've been assisting Afghan families that are in Charlotte. And that's been very baseline practical. Many of these families come with nothing. They have maybe a bag, maybe a suitcase. A lot of them had to leave quickly. And an example of that is we went to Fort Pickett, which is in Virginia, and there was about 8,000 Afghans that were waiting on a military base there to be relocated to different cities in the U.S. And I met a guy, and he told me, I just said, tell me your story of leaving Afghanistan. And he said, well, I was at the utility place paying my water bill. Like, I'm standing in line to pay my water bill, and my sister calls me and says, come to the airport right now because we're evacuating. And he says, well, so I stepped out of line, and I got in a taxi, and I went to the airport, and I left the country. And that's how he left his home. And I think that's a great picture of really the opposite of what Kate and I did when we moved to Thailand, where we got to like sell our house and plan everything out and pack our bags and take everything we wanted. And this guy knew that he either was going to step out of line and leave immediately, leave everything behind, leave his house, leave his friends, leave his clothes, leave his favorite whatever, or he was going to be killed, or his family was going to be under a threat of being killed. And so he shows up in America with whatever he had at the utility place that day, and that was it. Or whatever he picked up along the way, maybe some donations of clothes or whatever. But that's kind of where they're at when they show up. And so there's a lot of basics that we've been helping them with. Just trying to get them set up with life here. Some of them have English, some of them don't, but we're helping them in that transition. Part of it is just trying to put ourselves in their shoes. The government provides each Afghan or each refugee with $1,200, and they give them 90 days of this assistance. And after that, you're kind of on your own. And for some of these, they just need longer. They need more time in a structure. They need more help. And I'll share a little bit more about how we're helping some things that are happening in Charlotte specifically in a minute. But again, we're just trying to show compassion, empathy, hospitality. We want Afghans to say, we know what Christ is like because those who follow him showed kindness to us. We want their encounter with someone in the U.S. to be something that they've not experienced before. We want them to experience through the love of Christ. Instead of rejection or cast aside, we want to be able to meet them where their need is. And that kind of goes back to that verse in Matthew. It says, I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. And I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And so how are we helping in Charlotte? There's a picture. Let me see if it's the next one. We can go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is Zia. Zia, here he is with his Purple Heart from the U.S. military. He was a translator in Afghanistan, fought alongside U.S. veterans, U.S. military there. He lives in Charlotte. He's been in Charlotte for about 6 years, and he works for an organization called, well, loosely connected with a group called Independence Fund. It's a veterans organization that helps veterans with wheelchairs and assistance, things like that. Well, since the Afghan evacuation, Zia has been helping get family and friends and other translators to the U.S. and to Charlotte. I think he helped personally with probably 1,200 people evacuating and just finding the right resources and things like that. But I call Zia the mayor of the Afghan community in Charlotte. And the reason why, because he's been here a little while, he speaks English, he can translate, but he also, every day what he does is he wakes up and from the time he wakes up until late at night, is traveling around Charlotte, visiting all the Afghan families. What do you need? How can I help? He goes and gets goats from one market. He gets them cleaned and trimmed and like packaged, and he distributes the goat meat because it has to be special for special dietary and religious reasons. It has to be handled a certain way. He's gathering hot pots and tea kettles and things like that. But all day, every day, he's in his truck driving around the community, visiting with his fellow Afghans. And so we've worked a lot with Zia because he is kind of the voice to the community, but he's also the one who can tell us, hey, this is what's going on. This is what the needs are. And there have been a lot of churches that have come alongside Independence Fund with donations and things like that. But we're now at a stage where it's not just about like they need clothes, they need diapers, they need that. We're trying to help them get jobs, learn English, kind of take the next step in not just arriving, but beginning to be stabilized so that they can thrive while they're here. And Zia has been a big part of that. Part of our ministry here, but also just a part of us connecting to that community. Now, the only reason that we have been able to do that is God gave us some funding this year to hire a staff person in Charlotte who just showed up and said, can I ride with you? Zia, would you mind allowing me to experience your community? And he said yes. And so we just started riding with him, learning, listening, understanding, and that's opened the door for us to help and care for others. We were able to find, so one of the situations with Zia is his father-in-law, I think there's a picture next. Let's see if it's, yeah, okay. So this is Zia's father-in-law on the left side, not the white guy, but the Afghan. Zia's father-in-law was a general in the Afghan army, which was fighting the Taliban along with the U.S. Allied forces. He had an entire career in the military, retired, had houses, had businesses. He was wealthy in Afghanistan. I don't know how wealthy, but they measure things by goats there, and so I've been told many goats, many goats. He had many goats, okay? But his family, again, had to evacuate. A lot of that was connected to Zia. They would have been threatened or killed in Afghanistan. So they came to the U.S. They had a bad housing situation and had to leave their housing, and they were staying with Zia. So Zia had his father-in-law's family and his sister-in-law's family living with him. And so one day when we talked to Zia, how are you, Zia? Not great. All my family is living in my little house, and it's a lot of stress. Okay, Zia, let's find them housing. And so that's what we did. This guy right here, Scott, with the bandana, was just a guy in Charlotte who has multiple properties and loves refugees and said, how can I help? And we made the connection. We found them housing. We helped set up their utilities. We're helping them get a job. So here you have a guy who's quite older, doesn't know English. A couple weeks ago, he comes to Scott and comes to me and says, I'm working, and he couldn't say this in English, but he's practicing his ABCs. If you think about restarting life, he's desperate to contribute here and to be a part of our culture, but he's so far behind that we're just trying to help take those steps with him. But that's the Sadat family. Just another family that, as we started the project in Charlotte, we're just trying to help however we can. And our hope is that the local church will see that God desires for us to welcome those in our community. So we've been working with another church, connecting them directly to this family, the Sadat family. So that church is going to have like 7 or 8 people that are just committed to building relationship with this family, visiting with them on a regular basis, seeing what they need. Do they need to go to the doctor? Do they need help opening their mail and understanding, is this a bill? Is this a credit card? Is this a scam? Like, they don't know those things. And so we're trying to help navigate life with them. We're trying to do that with more families. So we're looking at adding a few more Afghan families, connecting them to churches in Charlotte, doing some things like that. But my hope is if we can welcome them, that God will use that to do some amazing things. So there's another side of it. I think the next slide, go to the next one actually. So another side of our work, that original phone call of can you help Afghans wasn't necessarily Afghans in the U.S. So these 2 women on the lower left here are Fazila and Shagufa. They're sisters. They were flight attendants for the VIP flights of the president of Afghanistan. So the president of Afghanistan was kind of put in place by the Allied military forces, but all of his flights that he took on his private plane, they were the flight attendants. And so they were around high-ranking officials on a regular basis, very high-level threat to the Taliban in terms of on their list. So when the Taliban was coming into Kabul, Afghanistan, they were closing in around the airport. Fazila and Shagufa, flight attendants, were at the airport and were desperate to get out. They were told there's no flights, there's no planes, nothing. But because they were flight attendants, they saw a plane on the tarmac, and they said, that plane's getting ready to go somewhere. So they just ran and got on the plane and shut the door themselves. And they didn't know where that plane was going. They just got on it, and that was it for them. That was their story of exiting. There was no goodbyes, no hugs, see you later. They got up in the air, and they kind of go up, and they find out it's a Ukrainian pilot, and the plane's going to Ukraine. And now this is probably October, November, so pre-Russia. So the plane gets to Ukraine. Now, on the way to Ukraine, these are very smart women. They speak great English. They're hilarious. On the way to Ukraine, they think, the Ukrainian government is probably going to feel really, threatened by the fact that, an entire plane of Afghans just landed on their runway. So they said, we should probably see if there's any weapons on this plane. So they actually go around with a cart, and they make an announcement and say, if you have any weapons, would you please pass them up? Because we don't want anything to be a threat. We want to have a good presence as we arrive. And they collect there's guns and knives and hammers, whatever. But they're just smart women. So they land in Ukraine, and they, along with 3 other women, they kind of get settled there. And there's a U.S. military veteran in Ukraine who's a photographer and a journalist, and she takes them in, helps them get housing, is providing some for their, for food, for rent, for cell phones. And she, the veteran, is the one that called and said, can you help? And so before the war in Ukraine, our first work with Afghans was helping these women from a distance. We connected them for sponsorship, for immigration applications, things like that. Unfortunately, they went from one traumatic situation to another, and I guess it was into February. I was in Charlotte, and I get a message from them saying, we have to leave Ukraine. War has happened here now, and we have to leave. And Kate and I were helping navigate them leaving on foot through Poland to Germany. And they're saying, do you know anybody in Germany? And we're scrambling. We had some missionaries from Charlotte we knew in Germany who welcomed them at the train station. We got them settled in Germany. They're still in Germany today. This is... So they're in Hamburg. The bottom picture on the right is, they're in Munich. The top picture on the right is the Ukraine border. We decided to go visit ourselves. But they're still there. They're in the immigration process in Germany at the moment. The issue is they don't have passports. The Afghan government doesn't exist at the moment. And they're just kind of stuck. So we're still helping them from a distance. But that's just another side of our work. It's we have a local work here in the Carolinas, and overseas, God's kind of given us both of those things. But part of it is just kind of showing up saying, how can we help? We're not a big ministry. There's not a lot of us. And we're not going to work with a lot of people, but we're going to be doing deep work with a few people. And our hope is just that as we do that, God does amazing things. I'll end with this story of vision for what God can do. So in November, I went to Fort Pickett, U.S. military base, where 8,000 Afghans were waiting to be relocated. And our goal in going was, we went to ministry in Charlotte called the Charlotte Eagles, and they were doing just soccer with kids. Because you think about this, 8,000 Afghans, you've traumatically left your home, you're in a military barrack with all these kids and all these families, and you've just been waiting for 3 months. Everything gets a little stuffy. And so we went up with soccer balls, and we just found open fields on the military base, and we just played soccer with kids all day long. And a lot of adults showed up too. And part of that process, one of the things that was really difficult is most of my day was spent breaking up fights. There's a lot of fighting among the kids. And what it really is, there's a lot of trauma. You think about these kids have grown up in war. It's all they've ever seen. And then they've been uprooted and thrown in another country. They don't know anything that's happening around them. And so a lot of the fighting was that. And so we just showed a lot of compassion, a lot of love. And I just realized, you know what? Like, we're the first line of kind of helping them understand what life is in this culture. That fighting is not like the answer. I don't know what the answer is there, but we're trying to help them just ease into life here. But one of the things that was really neat about that day is I went up there with 4 guys from Charlotte. And these 4 guys were, 3 of them were from Nepal, and 1 of them was from Congo. They were all 21 or 22 years old. And what's neat about it is they were all refugees that had come to America at the age of 8 and 9 and 10. And I asked each one of them, tell me your story. And they told me and said, well, I just got my citizenship in the U.S. I'm working. I volunteer with this ministry, with the Charlotte Eagles, and some other ministries here. And I'm a follower of Jesus. And in my family, I'm a leader because I'm the only one I speak the best English. I'm the first one to be a citizen, and I have a job, and I provide for my family. And I look at this, and I see these little kids who are 8, 9, 10 from Afghanistan who just arrived, and I have these 4 guys who are leaders in their community, leaders in their family, followers of Christ, citizens of the U.S., and I see the picture of hope of what I want to see for these Afghan kids, is that 10 years from now, 12 years from now, they can be leaders in their family, leaders in their Afghan community, followers of Christ, reaching out to other refugees. And so part of our work really is kind of hoping to see that happen just by helping however we can. So thank you guys for being a part of that, just in your encouragement, your prayers for us and your support. It's a slow work. It's not a quick fix, but we are grateful just to be a part of it. We see ourselves as an extension of the church in the work we do, and we want to bring the church into that work however we can. So I'm just going to pray for us and let things go from there. So God, thank you so much for